Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of WIRSPA's Rum Makers Series. My name is Matt Pietrek, and I'm here with my co-host, Devon. Today, we're interviewing Marc Paul from Angostura Distillers. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Matt. Hello, Devon.
So let's start by, Marc, just give us a brief introduction of what you are doing at Angostura, your current role at Angostura.
Well, currently I am the plant manager of the distillery in Angostura. This year would make 17 years, I believe, that I've been with the company. What I do is the areas that I oversee right now, which is due for change soon, but the areas that I oversee right now would be the distillation, fermentation and yeast plant operation, the wastewater treatment, the aging and warehousing operation, bulk logistics storage, and the Chaguaramas port facility operations. Three of those are going to be spun off into a new junior management position, and so that we can better manage and look at the overall operational efficiency and output. But in a nutshell, that is what I do in the company.
So is that all? Is that all you do?
That is all that I do, yes.
Excellent. So let's start like we traditionally do. Start from the beginning. Tell us about where you were born, grew up, all those things.
Well, I would have been born and raised in Arima. That is on the island of Trinidad in Trinidad and Tobago. It's located in the northeastern part of the island of Trinidad, and it is actually one of three boroughs, but the only borough to have a royal borough title, which was granted to it, I believe, in 1888 by Queen Victoria. That is mainly where it is. We have our First Peoples, the Santa Rosa community of First Peoples in Trinidad and Tobago. And growing up, more or less, I had a typical childhood, playing in the sand with my cousins, flying kite for Easter, more or less those traditional things that you do in your childhood. Growing up, I seem to have an affinity for the sciences. So I leaned towards that pretty early in my school career. Traditionally, I usually would watch Bill Nye the Science Guy, do Discovery Channel, do the Animal Planet. I don't know where it is that love for sciences came from. My parents were not into the sciences at all, but I somehow seemed to drift towards that. Going to school, even though I love the sciences and I'm watching all of these science channels, I wasn't exactly the strongest student in school up until about Form 3 and 4. That is really where it is I kind of picked up in terms of my academics and really started to lean into it and lean into the sciences. Generally in Trinidad, what we have back then, I could actually say back in my time, what we had in Trinidad was junior, senior secondary schools. And around Form 4 is when it is you can start specializing into the different subjects that you would do for CXC O levels. It would have been back then. So that is when it is I would have really started to pick up into the field of the sciences. I attended the junior sec school, Fibrous Junior Secondary School. And after that was from Form 1 to Form 3. After that, I attended Form 4 to Form 5 and the 2 years of A-levels in St. Augustine Senior, commonly known as the Green Machine, as a football school where it is we get a lot of footballers from the Green Machine. And I really did enjoy my school days, particularly in St. Augustine Senior. Those were really, really fun days.
So was there a rum drinking tradition in your family?
Not particularly. No, there wasn't really a rum drinking anything in my family. Outside of the seasonal where, you have the black cake, where it is you would use rum to make black cake and punch creme around Christmas time. My father would, on occasion, mix like Guinness and milk, or any kind of stout and milk, moccasin and milk, which I would be allowed to partake in. But I mean, the amount of milk and water, it would dilute the alcohol severely. But outside of that, no, I did not really come from a drinking background. And interestingly enough, when it is I was in secondary school, I was on the debate society. And in the debate society, what it is we had the option to do was it had the school notice board where it is we could make posters out of Bristol board, analog technology back in the day. And one of the things that I managed to campaign for and put up was advocating for um, not having alcohol within the society and the benefits of actually removing alcohol consumption from the society. Just the consumption, not the manufacturing, but removing alcohol consumption and the benefits that it would lead to a better society.
Okay, great, great. So, so you spoke to us about your time as junior sec and your A levels. Where did
Yes.
you attend university, and what was your area of study?
So my area of study really was influenced by my secondary school time. I really fell in love with chemistry. I fell very, very deeply in love with chemistry and to a lesser extent biology. As I said, I was very, very much interested in the sciences, so chemistry, biology, and physics. Not so much maths, but the three core sciences.
Same here, physics and math. I like good at physics, didn't like the math.
Yeah. Even though physics does have a lot of maths, but for some reason, maths has more maths than is necessary. So that really influenced what I did for A levels. So I did chemistry and biology in A levels. And well, because the combination selection, I had to do chemistry, biology, and maths in A levels, not physics. And once it is I graduated and I was looking at university, I more or less wanted to incorporate the love I had for biology and chemistry. So when I was signing up for the courses, I saw that in NATSI in the University of the West Indies, that they had a double major in biochemistry and chemistry. And so that is what I started to do my career in. There was a lot of when I was signing up that I got a lot of warnings in terms of the heaviness of biochemistry and chemistry, which I completely ignored. But I understood when it is I started to do the coursework why it is there was such intense warnings for doing a double major in chemistry and biochemistry. It was very intense, but I managed to survive, and I didn't dampen my love for chemistry. I didn't particularly like biochemistry. I think that was the more brutal of the coursework.
Mhm.
And so I did a double major in chem and biochemistry, and I also added on undeclared minor in analytical chemistry. So very heavy on the chemistry side in terms of um, my UE career. And of course, I would have done university in Trinidad and Tobago at the St. Augustine campus.
What year did you leave university, and what was your first roles outside of the rum industry before getting into it?
So I would have left university in 2008, basically after the intense grueling years that I would have spent in school. One of the first things I wanted to do was just get out and start working. I would have done just vacation work when I was at the university, just during the July August period. But my main goal was I did enough schooling. I wanted to start working as quickly as possible. In Trinidad, we would have had the GATE program, and one of the stipulations is that you work at least 3 years within the country in any sector, private or government sector, private or public sector. I was fortunate enough before I graduated in 2008, I got the opportunity to work as a clerk in one of the ministries, Ministry of Development and Gender Affairs, I believe it was, as a clerk one. And I was doing that because at graduation, we would have finished exams around May, um, April, May. I would have finished most of my exams. So as soon as that was done, graduation would have been in October. As soon as I was done, I went straight to work, didn't take any break. As I said, I just wanted to get out of school and start working as quickly as possible. So they would have called me up, I would have done the interview, I was successful, and I'd have gone into that program working as a clerk one. And that
Okay.
was mainly the substantive job that I had, a permanent job that I had when it is I left university.
So, when did you first join the rum industry? What was your sort of sequence from going from working in the government essentially to working in the industry, rum industry?
Well, so while it is I was working at just a couple months with the ministry, I would have gotten a call from HR in Angostura. Angostura has this program for persons who just or recently graduated from tertiary level education. It's a GWI program, Graduate Work Internship Program, where a lot of times new graduates are not able to get jobs within their specific field because they don't necessarily have the required job experience. So Angostura had this program where they would give you about uh, a year temporary contract so that you could get work experience within your specific field as much as they could provide um, within the specific field. And my resume came up from that in that process, and they contacted me to do an interview. And more or less, that is how it is I got introduced into the world of rum. I would have gone to do the interview. On the panel would have been, well, you all know Carol Homer Caesar. She was on the panel along with two persons from HR. They would have done the interview, and I would have told them that I had a permanent position in the government sector, the public sector, and they still offered me the 1 year internship with no guarantee for permanency. And when it is I went to and spoke to my family, spoke to my mother, she in particular didn't really see me with my background in chemistry working as a clerk forever in the government sector. So she advised that I take it, even though it was an internship and even though I would have to leave the government sector. And I did because it was basically to work in the quality area, and it would have more or less been the application of my degree or some form of my degree in the actual working world.
So actually, yes, Carol Homer Caesar was our first Rum Maker Series interview here. So great that you brought her up here. When you joined Angostura, what was your initial role?
So in Angostura, well, I would have started with the quality assurance team in the laboratory. And when it is you first enter into the lab, they usually start you off into the microbiology lab. The structure of the lab within Angostura, we call it the main lab, for quality assurance is really broken up into microbiology lab, the food and beverage, environmental, and instrumentation, instrument room labs. And when you first come in, they would always put you into the uh, microbiology lab. This is where it is you do the microscopy for the yeast, you do yeast plating, you do the initial stages of propagation, you do different forms of water testing and microbiological testing within the microB lab, which when I first went in, thought it was extremely important that I was given that charge. And another person that you may be familiar with within our industry who was in charge of the lab at that time would have been Malika Crichton. So when it is I started on my first day, walking into the very, very bright lab with all of the glass windows that you could see into each of the labs, and I went down into the back because microB is secluded so that we could have sterilization, went down into the back. One of the things that Malika specifically told me was that timeliness was very key because it was connected to the results going out for production and supporting the production department, being timely with my monthly reports. So I'd have to start doing reports at the end of each month. And within the reports, there was an expectation that I would make recommendations for improvements, which at that point in time, I was completely blown away. I was like, I know leave school. I was just working as a clerk, and now you're putting it seems like in the center of of everything, and it felt very important. And so I made sure to make a committed effort to pay attention to everything, so at least I could have one recommendation for improvement when it is I did my monthly report. Of course, when Malika was explaining these things to me, it wasn't that I was going to be doing it on my own, but I heard that I was basically running my own lab. And then if it is that I fail, there would be failure across the entire organization. So I was very focused.
Yes.
All right, so so quite obvious. In your initial years at TDL, you have spent a lot of time on across different labs and
Yes.
different problem domains. So can you briefly tell us some of your most valuable experience or some of your most uh, impactful experiences working on those labs?
So I think the most impactful aspects outside of the reporting and well getting acclimated to the standards and the SOPs, work instructions, I think the most impactful part within the lab was understanding the cross functionality of the support service that we provided for operations on the whole. And in doing that, I was exposed to a lot of projects. Some of the key projects I know that we did were looking at rice fermentation was one of the projects that I was put on to uh, because I'm not exactly sure, maybe I am sure. One of the things I was able to work independently on my own and after working go out into the other labs to kind of pick up on what is going on because microbe didn't necessarily stay in microbe all day to do work. And once it is you finish doing what you needed to do by maybe around 2 in the day, you would be expected to go out to learn the other aspects of the lab because those would be part of what it is you're doing. And in going out and making that initiative to connect with the other labs, I was assigned projects that were not necessarily connected to micro B. Um, the rice wine fermentation was a project that we went into and seeing how it is I operated with with that project in particular, I was given other projects. Two key projects from the lab, which were really big was when it is we were doing the HPLC analysis on sugar content in rum and molasses, which doing HPLC analysis on molasses is very, very difficult and very messy, just because of the nature of the contaminants in the molasses, as well as commissioning and starting up the ICP, which would have been used for trace metal analysis. I actually got a Employee of the Year award from the lab in terms of the work I would have done on the ICP in terms of getting it started, getting it operational. Myself and now currently the um, blending manager, Narissa Joseph, would have worked on that project when we were in the lab together. And both of us were recognized for the work in actually getting that piece of equipment up and running. Now, from our perspective, we were just working on getting the equipment up, making sure it was functional, doing what it needed to be done. But from the lab perspective, of course, this is a capital expenditure, very expensive equipment. And of course, once it is you make that investment as a company and as a department, you want to start getting the returns from that, which I didn't have that perspective at that point. I was mainly focused on just getting it up and running. But what the lab got out of it was the realization of an investment that allowed for unjustified future and further investments. So I think those key projects and exposure to projects is what really helped me grow and develop within the lab operations to see different aspects of the working world, really.
So you said you arrived at Angostura around 2008, and this was sort of an interesting period of time in Angostura's history. It was part of CL Financial, which by that point had acquired several other Caribbean distilleries, E&A Shear, and then the global financial crisis hits, and CL
2000.
Financial is of course over leveraged, and at some point has to divest most of its other rum holdings, but of course, being Trinidad-based, CL Financial retains Angostura. But how did these challenges impact your work at Angostura or the company as a whole from your perspective?
The crisis in 2008 that led to more or less a global recession definitely would have affected CL Financial. From my perspective, being new to the organization, I would not have had the entire context of what that impact would be, mainly what the effects would be in my day-to-day bubble, which would have been the lab at that point in time. So I can't really speak to the entire divestment of CL Financial and what that did. But the impact from what it is I could have seen outside of what we know, which is the selling off of significant portions of assets, because CL World Brands was really building a rum conglomerate, a global rum conglomerate with Angostura at the center. From what it is, I would have seen at that point in time is the significant management of cash flow, as in being part of the group and given what was happening with the over leverage, cash flow was a significant thing within the group. And Angostura definitely adapted in terms of managing its business very lean, very streamlined, and keeping it very tight with what purchases were essential, what were not essential, where investments were being made. And so you felt that level of tension. And then the general atmosphere within the staff was constant concern on the how much was being taken and drawn from Angostura, which has been around for a while. That type of over leverage can lead to the collapse of organizations. So I knew there were significant amounts of tension and concern and worry from the internal staff. But I think the Angostura management at the time definitely did the maneuverings to ensure that the company, the core company, is what really remained intact. I can't say that it impacted the operations in terms of the production aspect, because we kept operating and producing our brands and shipping globally. But I do know the cash flow aspect was a big negative impact that the company had to navigate.
You have spoken of your time in the lab and indeed was some impactful experience. How did your lab experience and your quality control experience help you for your move later into production space?
So the thing with working in a lab, and I think this might be universal across all labs, from talking to other persons in the Caribbean, other persons in other industries, I think what the lab always provides is the lab is in a world of black and white, of yes and no, or compliance or not compliance. And so what it gives you is it gives you a world of structure, an ordered organization, and a sequence of events, understanding the value of work instructions, understanding the value of training, and understanding validation, verification, uh, and those are key initiatives when it is you go into the production world. Information is key. Information is very key for the ability to make decisions quickly and to make the correct decisions. You need to have proper structure, proper documentation in order for the staff to be able to do what is required. The frontline staff in particular, training is a big initiative. Understanding the work instructions that they have to do to execute is also key. So I think those were the main aspects that I took away from the lab. And then the secondary aspects would be the audit cycle, because we are ISO certified. The audit cycle usually is heavy on the production and understanding what a non-conformance is, or what corrective actions are, how to deal and treat with correcting issues and implementing systematic change so that the error does not happen again. Those are key, um, valuable skill sets that I took from the laboratory into the production operation.
Good. Um, so I've known you for a while, Mark, but what stays with me a lot is some of the very important presentations you did at some WISPA meetings on waste management, which is a big thing in the rum industry these days. Um, in the mid 2010s, TDL had some challenges with the waste treatment, which went on for quite some time. Even had some community backlash. What
Yes.
was your role in mitigating this problem, and was it stressful for you?
So I will start with the shortest answer first. Yes, it was incredibly stressful. It was. I could not fathom the amount of pressure and stress that one could go through in a manufacturing company. Um, but with that stress came opportunity and definitely growth. So the long answer, the question that is the long answer is that wastewater saga spans several years. So not to take us into 3 4 hours of discussion, I will try to hit on the major points. So between the 2000 and I believe it would have been 2010, Angostura would have ventured into the process of actually constructing its wastewater treatment plant. The first initial hindrance was that what we needed to get was additional land space, because where Angostura is situated is now heavily populated. There's a community that kind of grew up around the TDL facility, which is at Angostura. So we were not able to get through with that land space. And so we had to do the construction on site at our facility and squeeze it into the space that we had available, which was not necessarily ideal. But that was the start of the significant amount of challenges. What happened was between 2010 to 2015, the construction would have gone on, and of course, it would have had a lot of delays, a lot of issues in terms of procurement, planning, issues with the contractor, the selected vendor at that point in time. All of this was going on independent of me, because I would have been stationed in the lab. I would have just had faint knowledge that there was the wastewater treatment plant that was coming on stream. The community definitely started to be impacted during that time, because where we're located is very waterlogged. We had to drive piles um, into the ground for the base for the tank so that it did not sink, because these are very, very large and massive tanks. Of course, we would have done the community advisory about the pile driving, but there's one thing to notify the communities, another thing for the communities to start experiencing that. So that was fraught with challenges, where I think they used to pelt eggs at the equipment because of how annoyed they were at the driving of the piles. So once operations got through with that, of course, it was to kick off and start the operation. Now, as I said, I would have been sheltered within the lab operation, so I was not privy or connected to that construction phase. But within the lab, we would have had the environmental lab as one of the labs that was part of the service that the main lab provided. So, given that this wastewater treatment plant was a critical aspect of the operation, the environmental lab needed to be relocated to within the distillery area. And of course, it needed to be manned with, at that time, 2 persons. So, Carol would have approached me and another, one of my colleagues, Shelley and Lautan, as earmarked to go down um, into the newly built environmental lab to support the operation. Now, this was a surprise and a shock because Carol identified certain skill set that she saw in me, but I was, oblivious of what was going on with the project and how fraught with issues was being encountered by the uh, production team in installing this wastewater treatment plant. So I would have raised with Carol at that time my concerns with, leaving main lab to go down to the distillery to work these long hours, and back and forth discussions I had with Carol. But she more or less laid out, she listened to my concerns, laid out that, well, this is going to be a significant challenge. We believe that you can contribute to the organization in a normal managerial leadership speak, to assuage my fears of going into a new environment, which seemed to be very intense with very long hours. Because I remember in the height of it, we were working 14 to 16 hours, both Shelley and myself doing a lot of work um, with the distillery team in regards to the wastewater treatment plant. But naturally, when it is we went into it, the I don't know if it is the lab background that we have, you start to see the forest and the trees and exactly how the scope of it goes into the production and what it means for the company. So even though we had concerns about the long hours, we were working well beyond what Carol had intended us to work, because when it is you started to see the nightmare of what was going on, it was just roll up his sleeves and jump in with the team, the distillery team, who at that particular point would have been, um, as I said, were dealing with significant challenges all the way from 2010 all the way up to 2015. So they themselves have been going through it. We were now coming in with fresh perspectives and, I guess, more energy to take the relay aspect, so to speak. And we started to communicate with the distillery operators. We started to communicate with the contractors. We started to go into the field to do the sampling with them, to understand how we should be taking the samples, what is the correct way that we should be taking the samples, what type of analyses we should be doing, more or less building this entire testing program from scratch. And with us getting so deeply involved, we started to see other gaps given our background in it. This is a highly biological system. From what it is we do in main lab in terms of supporting the distillery, we know the importance of biological control, nutrient management, and what we started to see was the deficiency of, yes, we actually got the physical construction done, and that was what the distillery team did very well, or at least tried to do very well, but it was an exhausted experience, and so they did not really factor in those fine-tuned details about what it is you do when it is you actually start running it. And there was this language barrier situation that kept coming up with the vendor because it was a company out of India and the commissioning engineer was from India. And English was not his first language. And for some reason, no matter, we would be sitting in meetings just as bystanders, as from the lab, as part of the key stakeholders, and in meetings, for some reason, there was this communication barrier between the distillery team and the commissioning engineering team. But we somehow understood everything that he was saying. But I think looking back on it, the frustration really was because things were going so badly that there was just, but at that point, knocking heads and not satisfied with the performance. But us not having that harrowing experience in terms of the construction and getting the plant up, kind of was able to take the battle and run another part of the relay with the distillery team that really was trying their very best to get the system running. And so we started to work with the commissioning engineer to do the SOPs, to do the work instructions, to do the jar testing for the uh, polymer chemistry, and the distillery management team started to take note of the heavy involvement. So we would come in very early, 4 or 5 in the morning, push through with our analyses. Shell and I would split up in terms of what we would do so that we can get the work done quickly. And then we would go out into the field, start taking notes, communicating those things with the distillery management, and really trying our best to see how we can move the needle forward because we needed to get everything running. And in doing that, that is how the distillery management team said, well, we see in the value and the asset that you're adding. So can you get more involved with the wastewater treatment operation? So I started to get more and more involved, and eventually there was a discussion between Carol, the senior manager of the lab, and Richard Ely, at the time, the senior manager of the distillery operation, in terms of moving me from the lab into operations full time, specifically with the wastewater treatment plant. So I did not necessarily go into the wastewater treatment plant with great knowledge and experience on wastewater treatment, but trial by fire and more or less going into the deep end is what kind of pushed me into that field and got me into the production operation.
So now you're in the production side of things, but in the I would say less glamorous aspect of wastewater treatment. How do you progress from that to being the distiller, the head distiller? How does that happen?
So a combination of being in the right place in the right time or wrong place at the right time. So transitioning over into the wastewater treatment plant, when it is we did actually get some level of stability with the operation, this would have been between 2016 and 2017. Very quickly we realized that we would not get any output that we were required to get, and particularly we were not in conformance with the discharge parameters. And that seemed to be an impossible thing for us to achieve. So what the distillery management would have done is more or less task me with the project, overseeing the project, being the technical lead on the project, not the project manager. That would still be with the distillery manager, but one of the technical lead that is supporting the distillery manager. And at that time, it would have been Rajiv Raghunanan in getting the wastewater treatment plant back operational. When we realized that it was not going to be operational in that current form, we needed to actually engineer, we would have reached out to many vendors locally and internationally, and we settled on one international company, MSA Environmental, that was really a think tank in terms of best practices with wastewater treatment management. And that would have been around 2017. And then we started the entire project of re-engineering and redesigning the plant. Um, the project was, I think, one of the largest projects in Angostura history. It is definitely one of the riskiest projects because without that treatment facility, there's no way that we could make um, alcohol from molasses because we have to treat the discharge from the stripper operation. So it was extremely risky. The community impact was also bad in that even though we did the air testing with the EMA, sent out monitors within the community, we did not have any VOC, volatile organic compounds, or hydrogen sulfide that was at toxic levels within the community. Hydrogen sulfide is something that you can smell in very, very trace amounts. And that was permeating throughout the entire Laventil and BTM community consistently with our operation. And so we definitely needed to do something to address that. It had reached a boiling point where the community actually protested on our facility. They stormed into the compound with placards and signs because they were very, very much fed up. And they took up like sludge and threw it on the Angostura sign. And it was a really low point for the company. And the company definitely pushed resources in terms of the manpower within the organization. So the team around me started to be built up with both persons from the lab as well as engineers being dedicated to this re-engineering project. Ayana Dinoon and Wendell Collymore would have been, we all would have been sequestered together to specifically work on getting this project up and running. And we finally reached the space in 2019 where we shut down our wastewater treatment operation and, well, half of it, because we still needed to produce alcohol. So we reduced the amount of alcohol we were producing. We shut down half of the treatment plant. And this was around September of 2019. And we went full steam into doing this massive re-engineering project with draining down the entire digester, discovering that the insulation was really badly done and the glass line tanks had severe corrosion, finding expertise to do patch repairs to this because we could not rebuild an entire tank given our timeline because it would literally destroy the company. So we went internationally, made an international team to do this re-engineering work. And it was during that time that seeing all of the negative impacts and how it is we were able to overcome them, retool, make ourselves adaptable to finding expertise, finding ways to keep the company going. That has been managed. Upper management recognized that we were a valuable asset, and they pulled us into management positions to really start to get more control and have more autonomy in terms of what we were doing with the project. And in us becoming management, that is when it is the alignment for succession planning really started to come on. Because again, this is a distillery project. So while it is the distillery was still running and functioning, I would be reporting to the then plant manager of the distillery, and my colleagues who were in engineering would report to the chief engineer. And the two of them, the distillery plant manager and the chief engineer, were really tasked with this entire, as the senior management team, this entire project and getting it all up and running. So that is how the alignment to operations really came into being. It was through the wastewater treatment project. I think really and truly what would have gave us significant amount of experience, managerial experience and troubleshooting experience was the COVID pandemic. Because we were shut down in September of 2019, and then the world shut down March of 2020. And again, through determination and focus and really understanding the impact, the negative impacts of the company, we were able to shut down our entire operation with staff from Serbia, Russia, and Germany, and hire all local team members, and using Zoom and WhatsApp, spin back up the project team, having remote support and a local team working on continuing with that project, eventually getting it back to a place in August of 2020. We could have restarted. And once it is we got that restarted, of course, it was still a nightmare to restart an anaerobic digester. But we got through that together. And once it is we really settled through, so that would have been from 2016, now we're going into 2021. In terms of the wastewater saga. And during that time, again, I would have been working closely with the then plant manager of the distillery. And he was, of course, getting up in years and eventually would be retiring. And so, because I was working so closely with him, not just on the wastewater treatment plant, because the skill set that you gain in one terrible place, you can apply to other other challenges within operation. I started to take more and more of the responsibility from him and align with succession planning. And I think in 2021 is when it is I would have taken over his portfolio and overseen all of the operations that he would have been overseeing.
Well, hopefully it's been smoother sailing since then.
No, it has been different waters, but not necessarily smoother waters. Different colors, different hues, but not necessarily smoother. But I think what it is we would have adapted to is knowledge retention with what worked and didn't work. And that learning curve of the entire team being involved, the distillery team, the frontline workers, pushing and making sure that we always had the end goal in mind, which was production and throughput, and us recording and documenting what the challenges were, what the resolutions were, and how we overcame them, mean that our reflex to respond to issues got a lot better. So we still had the same challenges, but we were able to respond to them faster.
So walk us through a typical day for you now as the head of things there.
I guess a typical day is an atypical day in in the world of manufacturing. The thing that I can't take credit for the saying, but and I can't remember who it is that I heard it from. As a manager, you have to be just good enough at many things, but not great at any one thing. And so a typical day is really feedback and input. Because the position that I'm in, we would have upper and top line management that will need to get particular information. You would have peers and colleagues that will need to get feedback, approval, get an understanding for what is going on. And then, of course, you have your reports, direct reports, and then the frontline staff that report to them. So it's more or less you're like a router with decision making, planning, communicating. So a typical day is getting about maybe 40 or 50 emails a day, which you can barely keep up with. Having multiple meetings with different key stakeholders to make sure that you either get information that is required, understand the direction that is required, making sure that you're compliant and compliant from in terms of the standards, but also compliant with regards to employee safety. And one of the things that we try to push is a heavy safety culture to make sure that the staff are safe and that we operate within a safe working environment. So it is a typical day, I would say, is juggling a lot of balls, dropping some, and picking up others.
So it's not standing next to a rum cask and sampling them all day, like we're often shown.
No, I would say if it is that you want to get a break from the rush, is when it says you go and stand by a cask and do cask appraisals, because we always have cask appraisals to do. And fortunately, Those of us that have training in it, fortunately or unfortunately, those of us that have training in it are called to do it. It can be quite tedious because it's a lot of nosing and making determinations, assessing the quality. But given the amount of manufacturing challenges that you deal with day to day, sometimes that is a welcome break.
You mentioned cask appraisals, of course, that will involve um, testing distillates and so on. Now, what are some of the biggest challenges in maintaining consistency in consistent quality of your distillates? For example, the molasses supply and molasses quality. What affects the quality of your distillates?
I think quality, because of how long we've been doing our operation, fermentation and distillation, because we have a pretty robust column distillation system, I think our quality is more or less well defined. I think where we would have more challenges maybe on the efficiency aspect, primarily around the fermentation efficiency. Because, well, we do batch distillation, so we do not recover and we don't reuse our yeast. We have our own strain of yeast that would be propagated in the lab, and then we would scale that up in our propagation plants, yeast propagation plants in fermentation. Um, because of that propagation, because of the possible contamination, I would say it's more along the lines of efficiency. Now, we would have been doing fermentation on this site since 1947. And of course, as you would know, in fermentation across the Caribbean, it's slow to change. What works, works, and we seldom tend to move away from it and introduce anything new to it. But when it is you look at the molasses and the type of molasses that we're getting, what works well for a lot of us is high sugar, high quality molasses, which would be inefficient sugar processing. But that is not the type of molasses that comes cheap, one, or is readily available. You have a lot of molasses with ash that may not be favorable, VFAs that may not be favorable. So how do you now get and extract and maintain the yeast performance? So the yeast will perform under most circumstances, but how do you make sure to get everything that you can get out of them, particularly when you're doing a batch fermentation? And what we are trying to do right now is introduce technology and automation. So the tradition would be to take a sample and use a hydrometer to check the specific SG, take a sample, send it to the lab to check the residual sugars. But a lot of that is reactionary and doesn't really help you pick up on any issues that you have going forward in a 24/7 operation, because you get in little snapshots in very long processes. So I wouldn't say so much quality issues, I'd say more efficiency challenges. And for us to overcome that, we're trying to introduce more sensory input. Our column distillation has a lot of sensory input. And it's very amazing that on the distillation side, you have a significant amount of automation and sensory input for controls. But on fermentation, we seem to want to hold on to the artisanal aspect, even though there are a lot of automation and information that you can get, particularly when it is you look at fermentation and I guess parallel industries. So in brewing, for example, they're very heavily controlled in their fermentation process, very, very sterile in their fermentation process. But while we don't necessarily need to have that level of sterility, because ours is a cacophony of different microbiological systems happening within our fermentation process that gives us the flavor profile. That's really where our flavor truly comes from. You do want to have more control and more input. And I think that is really where uh, my focus is at the point in time, because we have the quality, I think, under control. Is really the efficiency to kind of deal with worsening molasses supply, where it is the sugar content gets worse, the ash content gets worse, and how it is you can continue to perform and get the amount of alcohol per fermenter that will keep you basically profitable.
Right. And it feels like this is a consistent story across rum making is the sugar factories that are can be profitable and continue operating are the ones who are upgrading, being more efficient in that, and that's great for them, but less sugar in your molasses for you.
Yes.
Yeah. That's true. And the sugar factory will tell you they're in the business of making sugar, not making quality molasses for you. So,
Yes.
so talk to us a bit about the different types of distillates you have, primary and TDL, and what makes them different, what makes them special.
Well, TDL, as everyone would know, is primarily column distillates. So we would really have four types of distillates. The first, of course, being what comes off of our beer column or our stripper column. That's really our heavy rum, our heaviest rum profile. Um, the final product, of course, is the lightest clean spirit that comes off as the final product. So that's our light rum. And what we do with the blending team is that we would, from our heads draw, they would be able to make a light rum with esters, higher esters from a blend, and a medium heavy type profile. So those are the four different types of spirits that really the distillery produces that the blending team will take and the blending team will inform us of what portions to put to age. So we would age those four different types, and those four types is what it is they would use to craft the different products in the blending department.
So four distillates, and each aged separately.
Yes, yes.
So you mentioned primarily column still. Or continuous distillation. I've heard
Continuous
rumors though
distillation.
that a pot still might be returning, or a new pot still might be coming to TDL. What can you tell us about that?
Really? Did you hear that? I don't think I recall hearing that. As a plant manager, I think I would know.
Yeah.
So what we are looking at, I won't be able to go into too much detail, but essentially what we are looking at as the distillery is future growth and development. The the four different types of spirits that we put to age that blending utilizes, great quality. We understand what that is, but now we're looking at what we need to do to break into niche markets, specifically small, high value, high quality, limited edition blends.
The rum geeks for us.
Yes, 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 yes. Because column still is really, I mean, honestly, that is for mass production.
But Angostura does really good column still rum. But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm not arguing with the pot still either.
Yes. So, but the thing is that what pot still offers you is richer flavor, not volume, and not necessarily great consistent quality. Because the challenge with pot still is also consistency. Because depending on what happens in fermentation, you will definitely see it more in pot distillation than you would in column. Column tends to hammer, beat out any other wrinkles and give you a final product that is consistent. Pot distillation, however, gives you the nuances of fermentation a lot more. And so it gives the blender, the master blender, and the blending team more tools in the toolkit to be able to play with to make unique and bespoke blends. And I think what we're shifting towards as a business model, our strategy really is towards that limited edition, bespoke type model, because competing with the massive volume producers in the Diageo group and the Bacardi group, those things are difficult to do from our perspective as a small island nation in terms of our resources, what impacts us, and our reach. Our bitters is significantly widespread in 100 and at least 170 countries. Our rums are not so much. So penetration, market penetration is what we're looking at. And um, the idea of pot still could be an additional tool. I'm not saying if it is that we are going into that just yet. We wait to see. But that would be an added tool within the tool shed of the Angostura product, because the yeast that we produce our alcohol from, being specifically uniquely to Angostura, our specific own strain, having a distillation system that preserves that or enhances that quality draw off would be beneficial to us in some way, because the Angostura profile is very uniquely ours. And one thing that I learned from the WIRSPA technical conferences over the years is in Trinidad we only have one we only have one major distillery operation. In Jamaica they have several, and within the, I think it would have been the uh, Ray and Nephew group, where it is they, based off of their same challenges with waste treatment, they would have tried to produce their highest rum, I think in Clarendon.
Ray and Nephew would be New Yarmouth.
New Yarmouth, right. New Yarmouth, and they could not replicate it even though they did the fermentation. So it seems that even though you have the same yeast strain, the yeast in a specific environment makes a unique thing within that environment that you can't
The
necessarily.
terroir. We talk about
Yes,
that. That's
yes,
it.
yes,
Yeah.
it's that. So imagine if it is we have the ability to kind of make a concentrated form or a concentrated reflection of our bespoke yeast from fermentation. That would be an added tool that we can get with pot distillation rather than column distillation.
So you mentioned previously your blending team, the famed Angostura blending team. How closely do you work with them?
Well, they are my customers. I am their supplier. We supply them with unaged alcohol. We supply them with aged alcohol. When it is you look at our product line, outside of the Angostura Chill line, outside of the bitters range, outside of the overproof, all of our other products essentially are aged rums that they would take to blend. So them being my customer, of course, I have to bend to their demands in terms of quality, consistency, supply, and of course, growing the age in inventory for future development. Because one thing that you always have to have, one of the most valuable aspects of a distillery is really its age stock inventory, and making sure that we expand and grow that for the rums that would be when we leave our time at Angostura. One of the good things about working in a distillery is that there is a possibility, well, not a possibility, there is the fact that you are literally putting down inventory and stock for a generation that goes beyond you. And so we have to work closely with the blending team to see what that future would look like and how it is we can be consistent in our supply.
This was something, and I went to Dimmer Distillers and I chatted with Sharon, their master blender, and when she was telling me about how so much of the work was like in spreadsheets, calculating how much, like how many cask are we putting down for 5 years, how many mark, this mark for this long, and like market predictions of how much Eldorado 21 we're going to need in 17 years. How much do we have to have? And like that's not the romantic image of,
Yeah,
what the distiller and blender are doing, but that's the reality of it.
It's not romantic, it is very methodical. The artistry really comes in when it is you're doing the crafting. But the crafting is not the reality that people think it is, because you have staff, you have tanks, you have lines, you have production schedules, you have marketing who comes up with amazing ideas that will draw down your stock inventory. Because
And can we have it yesterday?
can you have it yesterday? Yeah, because in operations, it is a very rigid, methodical thing where it is you have to physically put down these cars. It has to physically age with time. Within our industry, if it is that you come out with a 5-year-old, it has to have at least a
Right.
5-year-old in it. You can't have a 3 or a 1-year-old and call it 5-year-old. And these are realities that are immovable. And so the spreadsheets really do help. And one of the things that we are doing in Angostura is that we have implemented the DRAM software to try to aid with that, because we have software and technology. What we're trying to do is move away from the Excel spreadsheet and really get I don't want to use the word artificial intelligence, but get a system that can do the predicting for you. So one of the components within the dram software is that you can actually put in your blend formulas and actually lock it away so that nobody has access to it, because blending is very, very secretive. Put in their blend formulas, and within that secret compartment, the DRAM software has access to all of your age stock inventory. So if it is that you say that you have this sales forecast, it can see, well, these are the age RUMs that will become mature at particular times, because that really is the tedious part. That is just straight line calculation. So if it is that you can automate those things, it can really help in terms of prediction and kind of buffer with the dreams and aspiration of marketing and sales.
As from operation point of view and blending, you have to work with a particular pipeline. It's a really a challenging
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yes, especially when it is when it is you have your quarterly targets, as in, oh,
Mhm.
we're down by
Mhm.
this. Let's see how much we can push through in the last month, and you realize that, well, I only have 5 tanks for this, not 25.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
You mentioned Carol and you mentioned Richard. It's two
Yes.
of the icons in we know is icons in our rum industry in the Caribbean that have
Mhm.
contributed a lot. Who would you say are there any other influential people along in your career that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, Carol would have started me off. As I said, she interviewed me from the start. I think one of the things that she enjoyed was that I made her laugh in the interview. Because I told that story that I would not repeat on online. Um, my formative years, so Carol would have been the senior manager at that point in time. So she brought me into the organization. She saw my capacity. But who really helped me within my formative years would have been Malika Crichton. Helped me to understand the importance of, quality, consistency, timelines, reporting, and, really give you structure and framework. And a lot of times you do need that level of structure and framework when it is you go into a world of chaos. Because a lot of times you have to bring that structure, particularly to marketing. You have to bring that structure to be able to get that pipeline to get the product out and to be able to respond. Definitely the troubleshooting aspect as well with political crisis. So Richard Ely and Rajiv Raghunanan for giving me the opportunity and recognizing my capabilities within operation. um, Wendell Kipps, who I trade under, and because he was my predecessor as the plant manager of the distillery at Calvin John. Amory O'Brien, who is the current master blender and overseeing the blending operations. Of course, Mr. Ian Forbes, the executive um, uh, manager, who came into the Angostura culture when it is we were going through our entire chaos with the waste treatment plant. And he was the executive that was really our project lead and project sponsor to battle with the board for the additional funding, the additional notes, the troubleshooting, the late nights. So yeah, I think that leadership that I went through really helped frame and shape me into the manager that I am today, where I am positioned right now. And of course, going forward, now we have expanding team. We have a new chief engineer. We have a new senior manager of operations overseeing the distillery and bottling. We are doing the spin-off of the warehouse and agent and Chagrama separation with new management. We're looking at data management as a team. So I think the benefit of having a rum operation, if it is I can digress to that, is that you wouldn't believe how diverse the learnings and the experiences can be, because there is HR, there is finance, there is dealing with union, union negotiation, union matters, doing board reports, understanding capex, outside of just the technical aspect. And when it is you're exposed to persons who understand that and you put yourself out there in terms of the value, you really do get to experience a lot. And that is why I think within the rum industry, you can have a long term career within the rum industry, because no one day is typical, no one day is boring. Sometimes you pray for boredom, but seldom do you get it from from rum manufacturing. But those persons, I think, would have really, and of course, my peers that I work with, Narissa, who's now the blending manager, William, who is the quality manager, we kind of grew up in Angostura together, and now we've actually branched out into management in our respective areas, and our history together helps us in terms of our communication. So it really is, rum industry is really a social network of not drinking, but the drinking helps to lubricate the social network.
So, Mark, when you're not making rum, which just seems like maybe all the time, uh, what are your hobbies? What else do you do?
So when I was younger, not that I'm old, when I was younger, I was very much into uh, running, long distance running, which I want to get back to. Not right now, but I want to get back into long distance trail running, because running, for some reason, running and walking is something that I can just go into a Zen mode. I really do enjoy it. I don't really have the time to dedicate to it now, and it's a good way to just really stay healthy because my other hobby is just eating, which I'm which I'm doing a lot of now for comfort. So I definitely have to start back running soon. But generally, I enjoy going out to different restaurants, experiencing food. And now that I've evolved from my younger years of wanting to ban alcohol consumption to becoming a connoisseur, I really do enjoy going to new places, eating, and also drinking and tasting different rums from different parts of the world. And not just rum, any kind of spirit, because it really is a reflection of the specific distillery, the specific team that make it, sometimes the specific country. It really does reflect a taste of somebody else's culture, what they go through. So those are the things that I really do as my downtime hobbies.
So, one final two-part question for you. First part, what one rum do you think would best represent what Angostura is capable of making today? And
One
the
rum?
second one, yeah, what one? Well, all of them, but like which one? If you had to pick one to show to demonstrate what Angostura is capable of doing, and then secondly, that may be different from the one rum you might just choose to sip after a long day and like, okay, I'm done for today. I'm going to enjoy some rum. What would that be?
So I think because in the Caribbean we have so many diverse uh, types of rums that we offer, but not like the single malt Scotch industry where they have a single type of mark. We generally tend to be quite diverse. I think it depends with Angostura. It depends on the occasion. So if it is that you're looking for a rum geek who wants to experience something very unique, our limited edition line, the first edition Symphony. I particularly like the first edition Symphony as a unique crafted rum, because that rum you definitely have to. It's not a rum to drink quickly, and it's a rum that's designed to go with. Well, for me, it's a rum that's designed to pair with ice, because when it is you pour that into ice and you sit down to drink it, the flavor profile changes as you are drinking it. And for somebody who's a seasoned drinker, really and truly, the complexities of the different notes is what will keep you interested. So that is in terms of a rum geek. If it is that you're looking at one that kind of represents the particular note of what Angostura flavor profile is, what our yeast really produces, I would say the Angostura 1919, definitely, of course, but uh, not really dominant, I think, is the Angostura 7-year-old. The Angostura 7-year-old, the Grand Reserve, but that really is a classic reflection of what our taste is. Um, but for that's more or less on the dark range, I think the Reserva, which I think should get more play than White Oak, but you didn't hear that from me. The Reserva, which is a 3-year-old, is really, really very smooth. And if it is that you're not a dark rum drinker, you're really into the light rums, the 3-year-old Reserva is really nice. But for me as an individual, at the end of the day, Definitely, I'm not doing any of those. I'm doing those in like fancy meal, but at the end of the day, you don't want to be fancy. You just want to cut the edge of life. I would do it with Fernandez Black Label.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Fernandez Black Label is my default. It's available. The thing is that it's available at any bar anywhere across the country. I'm just like White Oak, but I am more of a, in my years now, in my connoisseur years, I'm more of a uh, gold to dark rum drinker. I enjoy light rum, but it really doesn't give me the same profile as gold or dark. And Black Label, if it is that you're just drinking to just not think and watch the sunset or watch the moon rise, depending on the time that your day ends. Yeah, Fernandez Black Label Rum is my default drink.
No, surprise answer. I think we asked John George's once. I think he said it was 1824.
1824. Okay.
I can't argue with that one. That might be mine. So, although I love the 1787, but it's not an everyday rum. But
No, it's not an everyday rum. Yes, it's not an everyday rum.
Mark, this has been awesome, amazing. You've shared a whole lot with us. Thank you so much for doing this. And
my pleasure.
And again, we will have more Rum Maker series coming, planned already, and in the pipeline. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Devon. We will talk with you and look forward to seeing you later. Take care.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.